In today's video, I wanted to give you 10 tips for writing suggestions that you can use to rewire your relationship with your subconscious, perhaps changing some behaviors, some patterns you have, or changing some relationships you might have with some feelings. In particular, these suggestions are extra helpful with anything around anxiety versus feeling more relaxed. Before we get started today, please hit that like button if you get anything out of this video. Hit the subscribe button if you're interested in more content, and if you're one of the first 10 people to comment on this video and you want help with writing any of your own specific suggestions, I'd be happy to weigh in and help you with your suggestion writing. Jumping right into tip number 1 is to say what you want, not what you don't want. This is probably the most important tip I'm going to give you today, and I'm going to save the second best for last. The most important tip being, say what you want, not what you don't want. So many of us can articulate what we don't want, but really try to understand, well, what is it you do want? And once you can articulate that, oftentimes that's enough. Just writing that suggestion is already going to make big improvements, big strides. When I first got into hypnotherapy, the group of people I worked with the most at the very beginning were people who experienced test-taking anxiety. This is a group of people who were already doing the studying. So they were students doing the work, but during the actual exam, they felt a lot of anxiety, and that anxiety snowballed, and it was very challenging for them. So a very bad suggestion to give them would have been to say something like, well, don't be anxious. That's a terrible tip, because that's what they're already telling themselves. They're already saying, oh, don't be anxious, don't be anxious. Oh no, it's happening again. Oh, I'm feeling anxious. If you tell yourself not to be anxious, your subconscious often hears anxious or anxiety. Something you've probably heard before is, don't think of a white elephant. Well, it's pretty hard not to think of a white elephant right now. You're probably thinking of one right now. And so your subconscious doesn't hear the don't as much as it hears what you're saying. So if you're saying, don't be anxious, your subconscious might snowball into feeling anxious. I'm going to walk through tips 2, 3, and 4 because they're all somewhat related. So number 2 is that visualizing is often better than using words. Most of us can visualize and imagine things. There is a small part of the population who cannot visualize, and that if you're someone who can't visualize, then feel free to use words. But if you're someone who can visualize, that's often much better than words. A lot of professional athletes really focus on visualizing as part of their training. So as they visualize outcomes, they're able to make those outcomes happen more often. In the example I gave with the test-taking anxiety students, a lot of them really liked the idea of graduating. And so what we did is we focused on that visualization or that imagination of what they might be going through when they were graduating. And this brings me to number 3, which is, as much as possible, tie these suggestions to feelings and emotions. Feelings and emotions really help us experience things in a way we want to. So in the example I gave, they would imagine themselves walking at graduation. They would think, oh, there's my parents in the audience, and my parents are so proud of me. I'm so proud of myself. I feel so ecstatic. I'm feeling so joyful. So they're not just visualizing this experience, but they're imagining how they might feel during this experience. This brings me to tip number 4, which is to provide yourself with triggers. These are things, triggers can be anything. This is something that kicks off the suggestion in your mind. So it could be when you see a green tree, or it could be when you see a specific person, or if you're in sports, if you're in a certain situation. Or in the example I've been giving, it's a student, when they're taking a test, maybe they start to feel anxiety. And so that feeling is the trigger for them. And then what they can do is, one, that they're feeling that trigger, and they're like, oh my gosh, anxiety, this is my trigger. And instead of seeing anxiety as a bad thing, now they're seeing it as a trigger. And they can let themselves feel it for a full minute. So they can sort of drop the old thinking patterns they had, which is don't feel anxious, or it's happening again. And they can just let themselves feel the anxious. Let them feel, oh, what's happening in my body right now? Maybe even for a full minute. And then at that point, they can give themselves the suggestion. So in this case, maybe they're visualizing walking at graduation, and suddenly they're allowing themselves to feel those feelings of joy and pride that they might feel at walking at graduation. So the trigger for them was the feeling. And I think feelings, again, are great triggers, and they're great to add to suggestions because feelings are helpful guides in our lives. Tips 5, 6, and 7 I'm going to walk through together because they're very related. Tip number 5 is be specific and understandable. And tip 6 is to not use idioms or expressions. So if you're not being specific, your subconscious probably isn't going to grasp what you're talking about. An example is maybe you think, oh, I want to test like a boss. I want to take tests like a boss. Your subconscious probably isn't going to figure that out. You know, someone who doesn't speak English as a first language, they might not know what you mean by this expression. And similarly, your subconscious doesn't really necessarily know what to do with that. It might, but chances are it won't. So be very specific and understandable, and don't use any expressions. I'm going to be rich as Oprah would be an expression. I don't really know what that means specifically. What does rich mean? You know, does it just mean money? Or does rich mean I have lots of free time? Does rich mean I have lots of freedom to do what I want? You know, be very specific about what you mean by rich. And then by comparing yourself to Oprah Winfrey, again, that's just too vague. So just try to be very specific and understandable, and don't use expressions. And tip number 7 is to personalize this to you. A suggestion that might work great for someone else might work terribly for you. For me, the walking at graduation would have been a terrible way of writing a suggestion because I didn't care about graduation. That's not why I was doing anything in school. I was very interested in the learning process itself, and when I took an exam, I saw an exam as a window to what a professor wanted me to take away from their class. And so even if I got stuff wrong, I didn't care because I could still work it out after the exam was over and understand what is it that they wanted me to take away from their class. So that suggestion of imagining myself at graduation would have been useless. I didn't even walk at my graduation. For my PhD, I didn't even attend graduation. I just, you get the degree and that was that. And I didn't even bother walking or attending. I just got the degree from an office somewhere. Because I didn't care about the graduation, I cared much more about the learning process. Number 8 is to write suggestions in the present tense. So even the suggestion about imagining something in the future, you would still write it as something that's happening to you right now. And that's helping you imagine things. The more you can imagine things in the present moment, the more they become real to you right now. So instead of imagining, oh, I'm going to be good at test taking in some future point, you start to work on, oh, I'm really enjoying taking tests right now, or whatever your suggestion is. Number 9 is to keep it believable and achievable. If I write a suggestion that I take all exams flawlessly and perfectly, and I perform perfectly on all exams, that's not really believable to me, and it's certainly not achievable. So you're just setting yourself up for failure. What instead I like to do is think about something called a growth mindset. A growth mindset is an acknowledgement that on your journey to getting better at something, you're going to have a lot of learning opportunities, you're going to make mistakes. So if you think about anything that you're good at, you've made a lot of mistakes along the way. If you take a professional athlete, they didn't just become really good at their sport. They've worked very hard by making tons of mistakes along the way. They've had a lot of successes and they've had a lot of failures throughout that process. And so growth mindset is, I'm getting better and I make mistakes as I get better. And so you don't need to write into your suggestion, I'm going to make a ton of mistakes, but you can write into your suggestion something more related to growth and how you're getting better at something. That's far more believable. And make sure that your suggestion itself is achievable. And it's something that you truly believe you can accomplish or achieve. And that's going to be a far more effective suggestion for yourself. I said I'd save the second best for last, so tip number 10 is to revise, revisit, reword as often as you need to. As you think about your suggestion, or maybe you've even recorded it and you're listening to it, maybe something seems a little off. Well, go ahead and trust that and just go back and rework it. Or sometimes what happens is you're working on a suggestion and you feel like you've achieved it, or you've kind of gotten to another place where now you're thinking, oh, I want more. Maybe you've been working on some aspect of a sport and you've gotten quite good at that aspect. And so now you want to get to the next level. So maybe you reword your suggestion to incorporate some of the new things you've been learning about your sport. And so revisit and revise that suggestion. To give you an idea about how long this process might take, when I first got into hypnotherapy, I'd already been certified, so I'd already been working on suggestion writing. And so I'd been a certified hypnotherapist. When I was working with these students, I would separate an hour to just interview them and find out what they wanted, how they were managing things currently, what they were trying to do differently. And based on that hour interview, I would spend 2 to 6 hours of my own time to try to figure out suggestions that would work for them. And then I'd spend another hour with them reworking these suggestions according to that follow-up hour. So I'd show them what I'd come up with and we'd work it out. And so you're already looking at up to 8 hours of time. And then on top of that, I would record the suggestions for them, and they would need to listen to them ideally several times a day for at least 3 weeks to see benefit. And hypnotherapy is great, or these types of suggestions are great for lots of different things, but in particular, they're great at changing any sort of feeling of anxiety into more of a feeling of relaxation. That's something where hypnotherapy suggestions are very effective. They're very effective for test taking. The results were outstanding. Again, these were students who were already doing the studying, and after working on these suggestions, wow, their test scores were just incredibly, I couldn't believe how much they improved on their test taking outcomes. It was really amazing. And a lot of people have reported this, so it's not just me that's getting these results. A lot of hypnotherapists see a lot of positive results around test taking. And certainly if you're trying to change a behavior, this is really helpful. I wanted to give you that feedback so you'd know that this can take a long time, and what comes out can be very short. So for me, if I was giving myself suggestions on taking tests, it would follow all these 10 tips. It would be simply, I am deeply curious, and I enjoy taking tests. I enjoy the learning process. That's it, those 3 short statements. It might take me 8 hours to come up with those statements. So I don't want to make this seem easy, but what comes out can look very simple and easy, and often those are the best suggestions anyway, are the very simple ones. There's an expression that said, if I had more time, I would have said it in less words. And so if you spend a lot of time crafting suggestions, sometimes you can get it down to very few words, or even quick visualization. If you enjoyed any aspect of this video, please hit that like button, hit subscribe if you want access to more of my content, and like I said at the beginning of this video, if you're one of the first 10 people to comment on the video and you're wanting to work on a suggestion, feel free to ask me anything you want, and I'll try to provide help on writing that suggestion. Thank you and good luck. We've got a dog right here. Hi there.